Last New Year's Eve, my family banned me from their celebration, calling me a financial embarrassment who would ruin their perfect image. They had no idea I had just sold my tech startup for $2 billion the day before. As I watched their social media posts from my penthouse sipping champagne worth more than their mortgage, I realized something chilling my stepmother Victoria had been systematically stealing from Dad's accounts for years. Tonight, I would crash their party with evidence that would destroy everything they thought they knew about family loyalty. Call to action. Before we dive into this wild family revenge story, let me know in the comments where you are watching from tonight. If you have ever dealt with family betrayal or felt underestimated by people who should support you, smash that like button and hit subscribe because this story will show you exactly what happens when karma comes full circle. Trust me, you will want to see how this family drama unfolds. My name is Serafina Blake, and 6 months ago, I was the black sheep of my family. While my half-sister Madison was planning her third wedding and my stepbrother Trevor was failing his way through law school on Dad's dime, I was working 18-hour days building my artificial intelligence company, Neural Path Technologies, from my cramped studio apartment. Dad, Robert Blake, had built Blake Construction from nothing into a $50 million empire. When he married Victoria 15 years ago, she brought Madison and Trevor into our lives, and somehow I became the outsider in my own family. Victoria was everything Dad thought he wanted. Polished, sophisticated, and absolutely ruthless beneath her perfect smile. The first sign something was wrong came during Thanksgiving dinner. Dad looked exhausted, mentioning cash flow problems that made no sense. Blake Construction had just landed 3 major contracts worth over $30 million. When I asked about it, Victoria quickly changed the subject, shooting me a look that could freeze hell. That night, I could not sleep. Something felt off about Dad's financial stress. I had always been good with numbers, which is how I built my company's predictive algorithms, so I started digging. What I discovered made my blood run cold. Victoria had been systematically embezzling from Dad's business for over 3 years. She had created phantom vendor accounts, inflated project costs, and redirected payments to shell companies she controlled. The woman had stolen nearly $8 million, and Dad had no idea. The evidence was hidden in plain sight. Victoria handled all the administrative details of the business, claiming she wanted to help Dad focus on construction. She had created an elaborate web of fake invoices, duplicate payments, and manipulated expense reports. Every family vacation, every designer handbag, every luxury car payment, all funded by stealing from the man who trusted her completely. But the worst discovery came when I found evidence of her manipulating Dad's will. She had convinced him to change his estate planning using his love for her children to gradually reduce my inheritance. The new documents showed Madison and Trevor receiving 70% of everything, while I was left with just 10%. Victoria would control the remaining 20% as family trustee. Meanwhile, my startup was about to change everything. After 2 years of development, Neural Path had created breakthrough neural network software that could predict market trends with 97% accuracy. Tech giants were circling like sharks, and I was negotiating deals that would make me incredibly wealthy. The irony was not lost on me. While my family saw me as a failure, I was about to become more successful than any of them could imagine. The breaking point came 3 weeks before New Year's Eve. Dad called me voice shaking, saying he might have to sell the house. Victoria had convinced him that my computer hobby was embarrassing to the family reputation. She suggested I should not attend their annual New Year's party because potential business partners would be there, and my presence might hurt Dad's image. "Serafina, honey," Dad said, his voice hollow. "Maybe it would be better if you celebrated somewhere else this year. Victoria thinks it might be more appropriate." That conversation lasted 15 minutes, but it felt like a lifetime. Dad explained that Victoria and the kids felt I brought negative energy to family gatherings. They were worried my startup struggles would make them look bad in front of important guests. I hung up feeling completely devastated. This was the man who had taught me to ride a bike, who had attended every science fair, who had always believed in my dreams. Now he was choosing his new family over his own daughter. What Dad did not know was that I had accepted Technova Corporation's acquisition offer the day before. $2 billion for Neural Path Technologies. The contracts were signed, the money was being transferred, and by New Year's Day, I would be one of the youngest billionaires in America. But more importantly, I had spent weeks documenting Victoria's crimes. Bank records forged signature shell company registrations. Everything needed to prove she had been systematically destroying Dad's life while playing the perfect wife. As I sat in my apartment that night staring at the evidence spread across my dining table, I realized this was bigger than just theft. Victoria had isolated Dad from his friends, convinced him his daughter was a disappointment, and manipulated him into changing his will. She was not just stealing money, she was stealing his entire identity and legacy. The pattern was clear. Victoria would bleed the company dry, then convince Dad to sell everything to start fresh. She would disappear with her children and millions of dollars, leaving Dad with nothing but debt and regret. Madison and Trevor were complicit too. Madison's lavish lifestyle funded by stolen money required her mother's crimes to continue. Trevor's law school tuition, his luxury car, his expensive apartment, all paid for with Dad's stolen funds. They knew their mother was manipulating Dad, but they stayed silent because they benefited from her schemes. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. I would not just expose Victoria's crimes. I would make sure Dad understood exactly how his new family had betrayed him. The New Year's Eve party they had banned me from would become the stage for the most devastating family confrontation in Blake history. I spent the next 3 weeks preparing my evidence, organizing bank statements, and documenting every transaction. I hired the best financial forensics expert in the city to create an unshakable case. Every dollar Victoria had stolen would be traced, every lie would be exposed, and every manipulation would be revealed. The woman who had convinced my father I was not worthy of his family was about to learn what real power looked like. December 31st arrived with a bitter Boston snowstorm, but nothing could chill my determination. I spent the morning in my penthouse, which I had purchased just days earlier, a $50 million symbol of everything my family thought I could never achieve. The irony was perfect. While they planned to exclude me from their celebration, I was literally looking down on them from the most expensive address in the city. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from my publicist and lawyers. The acquisition announcement would go live at midnight, making my success impossible to ignore. But first, I had a family meeting to attend. At 7 p.m., I walked into Dad's house wearing a simple black dress and carrying a leather briefcase. The party was already in full swing. Victoria had invited every important business contact Dad had, plus several city council members and the mayor. She wanted to show off her perfect family while simultaneously erasing me from the picture. Victoria's face went white when she saw me. "Serafina, what are you doing here? We discussed this." "Actually, Victoria, you discussed it. I am here to see my father." I smiled sweetly, the same way she had been smiling while stealing from him for years. Dad appeared from the kitchen looking confused and slightly embarrassed. "Honey, I thought we agreed you would celebrate elsewhere tonight." "Dad, I need to talk to you. Privately. It is about the business." I kept my voice calm, but loud enough for nearby guests to hear. Victoria immediately stepped forward. "Robert, whatever this is can wait until after the party. Our guests are waiting." "No, Victoria, this cannot wait." I opened my briefcase and pulled out a single document. the bank statement showing the largest fraudulent transfer. Dad, did you authorize a payment of $200,000 to Pinnacle Consulting Services on November 15th? Dad took the paper, his brow furrowing. Pinnacle, I have never heard of that company. The nearby conversations began to quiet as people sensed tension. Victoria's hand was gripping her wine glass so tightly I thought it might shatter. That is interesting, I continued, because according to your business records, you have paid Pinnacle over $1 million in the past 18 months. Would you like to see the other invoices? The room was getting quieter. Mayor Davidson and the city development director were watching with obvious interest. These were the people Victoria wanted to impress, and now they were witnessing something that looked very much like a business scandal. Dad's face was changing as he studied the document. This signature, this is not how I sign my name. No, it is not. I pulled out more papers. But it matches perfectly with every signature on these other fraudulent payments. Someone has been forging your authorization, Dad. Someone has stolen over $8 million from Blake Construction. The words hit the room like a bomb. Conversations stopped completely. Victoria's perfect party was transforming into a public humiliation exactly as I had planned. This is ridiculous, Victoria said, but her voice was shaking. Serafina is obviously trying to cause drama because she was not invited tonight. Actually, Victoria, I was not invited because you told Dad I would embarrass the family. Ironic, considering you are the one who has been systematically embezzling from his company. I turned to address the room directly. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for disrupting your evening, but I thought you should know that some people you might be considering doing business with have been operating under false pretenses. Mayor Davidson stepped forward. Are you making a formal accusation of fraud, Miss Blake? I am presenting evidence of criminal activity to my father. What he chooses to do with that information is his decision. I pulled out the complete forensics report. This document traces every fraudulent transaction, every forged signature, and every shell company used to hide stolen funds. The evidence is overwhelming and indisputable. Dad was now surrounded by bank statements, invoices, and financial records. His face was cycling through confusion, disbelief, and slowly dawning horror as he recognized the scope of the betrayal. Victoria, he said quietly, these invoices, you told me they were for business consulting. They were, she said desperately. Serafina is twisting everything. She has always been jealous of our family. Our family? The words came out harder than I intended. Dad, show them your will. Serafina, that is private. Show them how Victoria convinced you to leave 70% of your estate to children who are not even your blood, while your actual daughter gets 10%. Show them how she has been manipulating you to cut me out of your life while she steals everything you built. The room was dead silent now. These were all business people who understood exactly what financial fraud looked like. They could see Dad's devastation as he realized the woman he loved had been systematically destroying him. Madison chose that moment to make the worst possible decision. Mom did not steal anything. Uncle Robert gives us money because he loves us. Just because you are a failure does not mean you can blame Mom for your problems. The casual cruelty of calling Dad Uncle Robert, while defending the woman who had stolen from him, was the final piece of evidence the room needed. Even Victoria looked horrified at her daughter's tactless honesty. Madison, Victoria hissed, but the damage was done. Dad looked up from the papers, his face completely changed. $8 million! You stole $8 million from me! While I was struggling to pay employees, while I was considering selling my house, you were taking money to pay for your children's luxury lifestyle. Robert, please let me explain. Explain what? How you forged my signature hundreds of times. How you created fake companies to hide theft. How you convinced me my own daughter was an embarrassment while you were the one destroying everything I worked for." The mayor cleared his throat. "I think we should leave you to handle this family matter privately." As the guests began filing out, I could see them whispering among themselves. By tomorrow, everyone in Boston's business community would know that Victoria Blake was a thief and Robert Blake was her victim. Her social climbing ambitions were over, but this was only the beginning of my plan. The aftermath of New Year's Eve was swift and brutal. Within 24 hours, news of the acquisition broke across every major financial publication. 24-year-old tech prodigy sells AI company for $2 billion, dominated headlines with my photo appearing alongside articles about the youngest self-made billionaires in America. Dad called me at 6 a.m. on New Year's Day, his voice broken. "Serafina, I had no idea about your success. And I had no idea about Victoria. Can you forgive me? Dad, you were manipulated by an expert. Victoria spent years isolating you and making you doubt yourself. The important thing now is making sure she faces consequences for what she has done." But Victoria was not going quietly. By the end of the week, she had hired Thomas Blackwood, one of Boston's most ruthless defense attorneys. Blackwood immediately went on the offensive, claiming I had fabricated evidence because I was angry about being excluded from the family. "Miss Blake clearly has the technical skills and financial resources to create convincing fake documents," Blackwood announced at a press conference. "This appears to be an elaborate revenge scheme by a bitter daughter who could not accept her family's decision to distance themselves from her failures." The narrative was clever and dangerous. Blackwood was painting me as a vindictive tech genius, using my skills to frame an innocent stepmother. He even suggested that my sudden wealth was suspicious, implying I might have engaged in insider trading or other financial crimes. That was when I realized I needed allies who could not be dismissed or discredited. My first call was to Sarah Martinez, the forensic accountant, who had helped me document Victoria's crimes. Sarah had 20 years of experience with the FBI's white-collar crime division before starting her own practice. Her reputation was unassailable, and her testimony would carry enormous weight in court. "Serafina," Sarah said when we met at her office, "I have seen a lot of embezzlement cases, but Victoria's operation was sophisticated. She understood financial systems well enough to hide her tracks for years. This was not opportunistic theft. This was systematic, planned fraud." Sarah agreed to testify not just about the evidence we had gathered, but about the psychological profile of long-term embezzlers. "Victoria shows classic patterns of financial narcissism. She believed she deserved your father's money more than he did. That kind of entitlement always escalates." My second ally was Detective Ray Coleman from the Boston Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit. Ray had been investigating white-collar crime for 15 years and had a particular interest in family-based financial abuse. "Cases like this are more common than people think," Ray explained during our meeting. "Criminals often target family members because the victims are less likely to prosecute. Victoria was counting on your father's love for her children to protect her from consequences." Ray's investigation uncovered additional evidence I had missed. Victoria had been running similar schemes in 2 previous relationships. Her first husband had died in a car accident just months after discovering financial irregularities in their joint accounts. Her second husband had filed for divorce, citing financial fraud, but Victoria had disappeared before the case could proceed. "Your stepmother is a serial financial predator," Ray told Dad during a formal interview. "She targets successful older men, marries them, gains access to their finances, then systematically steals everything she can before moving on to the next victim." The pattern was chilling. Victoria had refined her techniques over years of practice. The fake consulting companies, the forged signatures, the gradual manipulation of wills and estate planning. She had done this before, and she would have done it again. But Victoria's biggest mistake was underestimating my resources. When Blackwood suggested I might be engaged in financial crimes, I responded by hiring the most prestigious law firm in Boston. Henderson, Walsh and Associates had represented Fortune 500 companies and foreign governments. Their involvement sent a clear message. I was not just some angry daughter making accusations. Patricia Henderson, the firm's senior partner, was a legend in corporate law. When she agreed to handle my case personally, it legitimized everything I was claiming about Victoria. "Miss Blake," Patricia said during our strategy meeting, "your stepmother's attorney is trying to make this about family drama and revenge. We are going to make it about what it actually is: systematic theft, fraud, and conspiracy. This is not a family dispute. This is a federal crime." Patricia's team included former federal prosecutors, financial investigators, and forensic psychologists. They transformed my evidence into an unshakable legal case that addressed every possible defense Blackwood might attempt. The psychological angle was particularly powerful. Dr. Elizabeth Warren, a forensic psychologist specializing in financial crimes, analyzed Victoria's behavior patterns and concluded that she showed clear signs of antisocial personality disorder combined with financial narcissism. Mrs. Blake demonstrated classic manipulation techniques, Dr. Warren explained in her report. She isolated her victim from support systems, gradually assumed control of financial decisions, and used emotional leverage to prevent questioning of her actions. This is predatory behavior, not marital disagreement. As my legal team assembled evidence, the media narrative began to shift. Initial stories had focused on the dramatic family confrontation, but deeper reporting revealed Victoria's criminal history and the sophistication of her fraud scheme. The breakthrough came when Ray Coleman's investigation uncovered Victoria's connection to a wider network of financial criminals. She had been working with Marcus Webb, a disbarred lawyer who specialized in creating shell companies for embezzlement schemes. Webb had helped at least a dozen people steal money from family members over the past 5 years. This was not just Victoria acting alone, Ray explained to the prosecutor's office. She was part of an organized criminal enterprise that specifically targeted family relationships to facilitate financial crimes. The federal implications changed everything. What had started as a local embezzlement case was now part of a multi-state investigation into organized financial fraud. The FBI became involved, and suddenly, Victoria was facing not just theft charges, but conspiracy and racketeering charges that could result in 20 years in federal prison. Meanwhile, Madison and Trevor were discovering that their luxury lifestyle was built on criminal proceeds. The cars, apartments, and credit cards Victoria had provided were all purchased with stolen money. They faced potential charges as accessories to fraud, and their assets were being frozen pending the criminal investigation. Dad was struggling with the emotional impact of the betrayal, but he was also angry in a way I had never seen before. Serafina. I spent 15 years thinking I had found the perfect woman to complete our family. Instead, I brought a criminal into our home who stole from me while convincing me to reject my own daughter. The guilt was eating him alive. He had chosen Victoria over me countless times, believing her lies about my character, while she systematically stole his life savings. The weight of that realization was transforming his personality from gentle and trusting to determined and focused on justice. Dad. I told him during one of our daily phone calls, Victoria is an expert manipulator. She spent years studying how to exploit your good nature. You are not responsible for being the victim of a professional criminal. But Dad was determined to make things right, not just legally, but personally. He fired the estate planning attorney Victoria had chosen and hired independent legal counsel to restore his will to its original terms. He also established a trust to ensure that Victoria and her children would never benefit from his estate regardless of the criminal case outcome. The alliance I had built was becoming unstoppable. Law enforcement forensic experts, media investigators, and federal prosecutors were all working together to ensure Victoria faced full consequences for her crimes. But Victoria had one more card to play, and it would nearly destroy everything we had built. 3 weeks into February, just as federal prosecutors were preparing to file formal charges, I received a devastating phone call from Patricia Henderson. "Serafina, we have a serious problem. Sarah Martinez has withdrawn her testimony and is claiming her forensic analysis was compromised." My heart stopped. Sarah was the foundation of our entire case. Without her expert testimony validating the financial evidence, Victoria's defense could claim the documents were fabricated. "What do you mean compromised?" Sarah spent months verifying every transaction. "She is saying she made errors in her analysis and cannot stand behind her conclusions. She has also returned her fee and terminated her contract with us immediately." I knew something was wrong. Sarah had been passionate about the case, calling Victoria's scheme one of the most sophisticated she had ever seen. There was no way she would suddenly doubt her own work. The truth came out 2 days later when Detective Coleman called with devastating news. "Serafina, we think Sarah Martinez has been compromised. We found evidence that someone transferred $500,000 to an offshore account linked to her daughter's medical expenses." Sarah's 15-year-old daughter, Emma, had been battling leukemia for 2 years. The family's insurance had reached its lifetime maximum, and they were facing hundreds of thousands in out-of-pocket medical costs. Someone had discovered this vulnerability and exploited it. Victoria's people offered to pay for Emma's treatment in exchange for Sarah recanting her testimony. Coleman explained. They found her pressure point and used it against her. The betrayal cut deeper than I expected. Sarah had been more than just an expert witness. She had become a mentor figure who understood the psychological impact of financial betrayal. Now she was being forced to choose between justice and her daughter's life. When I called Sarah directly, she broke down crying. "Serafina, I am so sorry. They said if I do not withdraw my testimony, they will make sure Emma cannot get the experimental treatment she needs. I cannot let my daughter die for this case." "Sarah, we can find other ways to pay for Emma's treatment. You do not have to let them blackmail you." "It is not just the money. They showed me pictures of Emma leaving school, getting into our car, walking into the hospital. They know where she is every moment of every day. These people are dangerous, Serafina. More dangerous than I realized." The threat against a sick child revealed how desperate Victoria had become. She was not just fighting criminal charges. She was fighting for her freedom and willing to threaten anyone who stood in her way. But Sarah's withdrawal created a cascade of problems. Marcus Webb, the disbarred lawyer who had helped Victoria create shell companies, suddenly claimed he had never worked with her. 2 key witnesses who had agreed to testify about Victoria's previous marriages received anonymous threats and refused to cooperate with prosecutors. Thomas Blackwood immediately seized on Sarah's recantation to file motions dismissing all charges. The prosecution's case was built on flawed forensic analysis by an expert who has now admitted her work was unreliable. He announced to the media, "This entire case is falling apart because it was based on fabricated evidence." The media narrative shifted again. Headlines like "Billionaire's Revenge Scheme Unravels" and "Expert Witness Recants in High-Profile Fraud Case" dominated business news. Victoria's team was successfully painting me as a vindictive daughter using my wealth to frame an innocent woman. Dad was devastated. "Serafina, maybe we should accept that Victoria will get away with this. I cannot watch you destroy yourself trying to prove something that apparently cannot be proven." For the first time since discovering Victoria's crimes, I felt truly defeated. The woman who had stolen $8 million and manipulated my father for years was going to escape justice because she was willing to threaten a child with cancer. That night, I sat in my penthouse overlooking Boston Harbor, wondering if some people are simply too ruthless to face consequences. Victoria had built her entire life around exploiting others' humanity, using their love and compassion against them. But as I reviewed the case files one more time, something struck me. Victoria's team had moved too quickly to silence Sarah. They had known about Emma's medical situation and had a bribery plan ready within days of Sarah agreeing to testify. That level of detailed personal information required serious investigation resources. I called Detective Coleman. "Ray, how did Victoria's people know about Emma's medical bills? That information should have been private." "We have been wondering the same thing. Someone with access to medical records or insurance databases would have had to provide that information." The next morning, I hired a private investigation firm to trace how Victoria had obtained Sarah's personal information. What they discovered was shocking. Victoria had been paying a private detective named Jonathan Cross to investigate everyone involved in the case, including prosecutors, witnesses, and even Detective Coleman himself. Cross had been conducting illegal surveillance, hacking medical records, and building psychological profiles to identify vulnerabilities in anyone who threatened Victoria. The operation was far more extensive than simple witness tampering. It was systematic intimidation designed to destroy the entire case. But Cross had made one crucial mistake. His surveillance operation had documented everything, including recorded phone calls with Victoria discussing specific threats against witnesses. The private detective had been secretly recording his conversations with Victoria to protect himself if the operation was discovered. When federal agents raided Cross's office, they found hundreds of hours of recordings proving that Victoria had orchestrated a comprehensive witness intimidation campaign. The recordings included Victoria explicitly approving threats against Sarah's daughter and discussing plans to frame me for fabricating evidence. The most damaging recording was Victoria's conversation with Marcus Webb about eliminating potential witnesses. "These people think they can destroy me," Victoria said on the tape. "They have no idea what I am capable of. If they want to play hardball, I will show them what real power looks like." Within 24 hours of the raid, Marcus Webb was arrested and immediately agreed to cooperate with federal prosecutors in exchange for a reduced sentence. Sarah Martinez was offered witness protection for her family and agreed to restore her original testimony. But the most stunning revelation came when Cross turned over his complete surveillance files. Victoria had been investigating potential victims for her next marriage even while married to Dad. She had detailed financial profiles of 6 wealthy widowers and had already begun cultivating relationships with 2 of them. Your stepmother was not planning to stay married to your father much longer. Agent Rebecca Torres from the FBI's White Collar Crime Division explained. She was preparing to drain his accounts and move on to her next target. You stopping her probably saved your father from complete financial ruin. The witness intimidation charges carried federal sentences of up to 20 years each. Combined with the embezzlement, fraud, and conspiracy charges, Victoria was now facing life in prison. Her carefully constructed image as a sophisticated socialite was replaced by the reality of a career criminal who had spent years perfecting the art of financial predation. Dad broke down when he heard the recordings of Victoria discussing him as just another mark to be exploited. 15 years of my life. I loved that woman. I trusted her with everything, and she was planning to destroy me from the beginning. The betrayal was complete, but so was the evidence of Victoria's guilt. The witness intimidation case transformed everything, but our strongest new ally came from an unexpected source. Victoria's own past finally caught up with her. Dr. Amanda Sterling contacted Detective Coleman in March after seeing Victoria's case in the news. Amanda was a psychiatrist from Seattle who had been married to Victoria's second husband, Dr. Richard Sterling, before his mysterious death 5 years earlier. "I have been waiting for someone like Victoria Blake to surface again," Amanda explained during our video conference. "I always knew she would continue her pattern until someone with enough resources could stop her." Amanda's story was chilling. She had met Richard 6 months after his divorce from Victoria was finalized. Richard was a successful cardiologist who had discovered Victoria's embezzlement just before filing for divorce. He had documentation proving she had stolen over $3 million from his medical practice. Richard was preparing to file criminal charges when he died in what police ruled an accidental overdose, Amanda continued. But Richard was not the type to abuse prescription medication. He was obsessively careful about drug interactions and dosages. Amanda had always suspected Victoria was involved in Richard's death, but lacked evidence to pursue the case. However, she had preserved all of Richard's financial records and legal documents from his divorce proceedings. Richard documented everything. He had bank statements, forged checks, falsified medical billing records. Everything needed to prove Victoria had been systematically stealing from his practice for 2 years. The documentation Amanda provided was devastating. Victoria had used identical techniques in Richard's case: fake vendor accounts, inflated expenses, and forged signatures. The pattern was so similar to Dad's case that it proved Victoria's crimes were not opportunistic but carefully planned and repeatedly executed. More importantly, Amanda revealed that Victoria had threatened Richard's children from his first marriage, just as she had threatened Sarah's daughter. Victoria told Richard's son that accidents could happen to college students who lived alone if their father continued pursuing legal action against her. Federal prosecutors immediately reopened Richard Sterling's death as a potential homicide. The combination of financial motive documented threats and Victoria's established pattern of intimidation made her a prime suspect in what had previously been considered an accidental overdose. But Amanda brought more than just evidence. She brought connections. As a respected psychiatrist, she had credibility with law enforcement and media that could not be questioned. When she spoke publicly about Victoria's history, her professional reputation gave weight to every accusation. "Victoria Blake represents a specific type of criminal that our justice system struggles to prosecute," Amanda told a packed press conference. "She exploits the most fundamental human relationships, marriage, family, trust, to commit financial crimes. She uses love as a weapon, and she will continue destroying lives until she is permanently stopped." Amanda also connected us with Detective Lisa Park from Seattle Police Department, who had originally investigated Richard's death. Detective Park admitted she had always been suspicious of the circumstances, but lacked evidence to pursue murder charges. "Dr. Sterling was found with a lethal combination of medications in his system," Park explained. "But the drugs were ones he would never have taken together. Someone with medical knowledge had to administer that combination deliberately." See, Park's investigation had uncovered evidence that Victoria had researched drug interactions extensively in the weeks before Richard's death. She had checked out library books about pharmacology and had made internet searches about medication overdoses that could appear accidental. Victoria had the knowledge, opportunity, and motive to kill Dr. Sterling, Park concluded. "We just could not prove she had administered the drugs. But with her established pattern of threats and violence, we can reopen the case with federal support." The murder investigation added a terrifying dimension to Victoria's crimes. She was not just a white-collar criminal. She was potentially a killer who had escalated to murder when financial fraud was not sufficient to protect her secrets. Meanwhile, Marcus Webb's cooperation was providing additional evidence about Victoria's criminal network. Webb revealed that Victoria had been part of a sophisticated operation that specifically targeted wealthy older men through dating websites and social connections. Victoria was not working alone, Webb explained to federal prosecutors. There are at least 6 other women running identical schemes across the country. They share information about potential targets and techniques for avoiding detection. The revelation that Victoria was part of an organized criminal enterprise specializing in marriage fraud elevated the case to federal racketeering charges. The FBI was now investigating a multi-state operation that had potentially stolen tens of millions of dollars from dozens of victims. Agent Torres showed me photos of Victoria's collaborators, women who appeared to be sophisticated socialites but were actually career criminals who specialized in financial seduction and theft. Your case broke open an entire criminal organization, Torres explained. Victoria was one of their most successful operators. The evidence kept mounting. Financial investigators traced Victoria's stolen money through multiple offshore accounts and shell companies. They discovered she had been hiding assets in preparation for her planned escape after draining Dad's accounts completely. Victoria had already purchased a home in Costa Rica under an assumed name, Agent Torres revealed. She was planning to disappear within 6 months, leaving your father with nothing but debt and legal problems. The international aspect of Victoria's crimes meant she would face additional charges for money laundering and conspiracy to commit fraud across state and national borders. Each new charge carried potential sentences that would ensure she never threatened another family again. But perhaps the most satisfying evidence came from Victoria's own communications. Cross's surveillance operation had been so comprehensive that it included recordings of Victoria bragging to her criminal associates about her success in manipulating Dad. "Robert Blake is the perfect mark," Victoria said in one recorded phone call. "He is wealthy, trusting, and desperate for family connection after his wife died. His daughter is a failure who makes him feel guilty, so he will do anything to prove he has built a better family with me." The casual cruelty with which Victoria discussed Dad's grief over my mother's death was heartbreaking. She had identified his vulnerability and exploited it systematically for years. Dad listened to those recordings with tears streaming down his face. She knew exactly how to hurt me. Every conversation about family loyalty, every suggestion that you were disappointing me, it was all calculated to make me easier to control. The evidence was now overwhelming and irrefutable. Victoria faced charges in multiple states, federal conspiracy charges, potential murder charges, and civil lawsuits that would recover every dollar she had stolen. Her criminal network was being dismantled, and her carefully constructed new identity was completely destroyed. Amanda Sterling had become not just an ally, but a close friend. "Serafina," she told me during one of our regular calls, "Richard would be so proud that his evidence finally stopped Victoria from hurting more families. You gave his death meaning by ensuring she faces justice." The case that had begun as family drama was now a federal investigation that would protect countless future victims from Victoria's predatory schemes. The final phase of Victoria's downfall began on a gray April morning when federal marshals arrested her at Boston Logan Airport. She had been attempting to board a flight to Costa Rica, using false identification documents carrying 2 suitcases filled with cash and jewelry purchased with stolen money. The arrest was broadcast live on local news channels. Victoria, who had spent years cultivating an image of sophisticated elegance, was led away in handcuffs while reporters shouted questions about her crimes. The woman who had banned me from family gatherings because I was embarrassing was now the most notorious criminal in Boston. Within hours, Madison and Trevor were also arrested as accessories to money laundering and fraud. Their luxury lifestyle, funded entirely by stolen money, made them complicit in Victoria's crimes, regardless of their claimed ignorance. Madison's social media posts showing designer purchases were now evidence in a federal case. The trial lasted 3 weeks and became a media sensation. Victoria's defense team tried everything, claiming she was a victim of domestic abuse, suggesting I had framed her out of jealousy, even arguing that her theft was justified because Dad had more money than he needed. Nothing worked. The evidence was overwhelming, the witness testimony was devastating, and Victoria's own recorded words proved her guilt beyond any reasonable doubt. Sarah Martinez testified via video link from witness protection, her voice strong and clear as she explained how Victoria's people had threatened her daughter's life. Mrs. Blake represents everything wrong with white-collar crime, Sarah said. She weaponized compassion and used love as a tool for theft. Detective Coleman presented evidence of Victoria's systematic intimidation campaign. Amanda Sterling testified about Victoria's identical pattern in her previous marriage. Agent Torres detailed the international criminal network Victoria had been part of for over a decade. But the most powerful testimony came from Dad himself. He spoke quietly about the emotional manipulation, the gradual isolation from his daughter, and the systematic destruction of his self-confidence. Victoria convinced me that Serafina was a disappointment. Dad testified, "While my daughter was building $1 billion company, I was believing lies about her character told by the woman who was stealing my life savings." When the jury returned guilty verdicts on all counts, Victoria showed emotion for the first time during the trial. She turned to look at Dad and me in the gallery, her face twisted with rage rather than remorse. "You think you have won," she said before the judge could silence her, "but you have destroyed your own family. Those children loved Robert, and now they will grow up knowing their stepfather chose revenge over love." Her final manipulation attempt failed completely. The judge sentenced Victoria to 45 years in federal prison without possibility of parole. Madison received 15 years for money laundering, while Trevor got 12 years for conspiracy and fraud. The financial recovery was swift and complete. Federal agents had traced every stolen dollar through Victoria's network of shell companies and offshore accounts. Dad recovered not just the $8 million she had stolen, but additional funds she had hidden in preparation for her planned escape. More importantly, civil suits against Victoria's criminal network recovered money for dozens of other victims across the country. Amanda Sterling finally received justice for her late husband, and several other families learned the truth about mysterious financial losses they had suffered after trusting Victoria's associates. The personal healing took longer than the legal resolution. Dad struggled with guilt about how he had treated me during Victoria's manipulation campaign. "Serafina, I chose a criminal over my own daughter. I let that woman convince me you were failing when you were actually more successful than I ever dreamed. Dad, Victoria was a professional manipulator. She spent years studying how to exploit your good nature. You are not responsible for being the victim of someone who made lying and stealing her career." But Dad was determined to rebuild our relationship on a foundation of complete honesty. He sold the house where Victoria had orchestrated her crimes and moved into a smaller place where we could create new memories without the shadow of her presence. The Blake Construction Company, freed from Victoria's systematic theft, became more profitable than ever. Dad hired independent financial managers and established strict oversight procedures to prevent future fraud. The company that had nearly failed due to embezzlement was now thriving and expanding into new markets. I used my resources to establish the Sterling Foundation for Financial Crime Victims, named in honor of Amanda's late husband. The foundation provides legal assistance and financial support for families dealing with marriage fraud and elder financial abuse. Amanda became the foundation's chief advisor and one of my closest friends. Richard would be amazed to see how his death led to protecting so many other families, she often said. Victoria's greed finally led to justice for everyone she hurt. Sarah Martinez and her daughter Emma became part of our extended chosen family. Emma's cancer treatment was successful, and Sarah returned to her forensic accounting practice with a renewed sense of purpose. Victoria taught me that staying silent in the face of threats only enables more crimes, Sarah explained. Speaking truth is worth any risk. The media coverage evolved from sensational family drama to serious examination of financial crimes within families. My story inspired legislative changes strengthening penalties for elder financial abuse and marriage fraud. Victoria's case became a textbook example of how sophisticated criminals exploit family relationships. 6 months after Victoria's sentencing, Dad and I celebrated New Year's Eve together in my penthouse. We watched fireworks over Boston Harbor while reflecting on how completely our lives had changed. "Last year, Victoria banned you from our celebration because she thought you were an embarrassment," Dad said. "Tonight, you are one of the most successful entrepreneurs in America, and she is serving a life sentence in federal prison. Karma has quite a sense of timing. The woman who had tried to steal my inheritance, destroy my relationship with my father, and erase me from my own family was now forgotten except as a cautionary tale." Meanwhile, Dad and I had built a stronger relationship than we had ever had before, based on mutual respect and complete honesty. Victoria had been wrong about everything. Family loyalty is not about blood relationships or financial dependence. Real family is built on trust, support, and choosing to stand by each other even when it is difficult. The Blake family she had tried to destroy was stronger than ever, while the false family she had created was scattered in federal prisons across the country. Have you ever dealt with someone who tried to manipulate your family relationships or steal from people you love? Share your stories in the comments below. Sometimes exposing the truth is the only way to protect the people who matter most. If this story of family karma and justice served resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories about standing up to manipulation and finding the courage to fight for what is right. Share this video with anyone who needs to hear that truth always wins in the end, even when it takes time and courage to reveal it. Thank you for joining me on this journey, and remember that chosen family built on honesty and mutual support is always stronger than blood relationships built on lies and exploitation.